At 1,417 hours on June 12, 1944, Master Sergeant Vincent Calabrese stood on the dirt runway of A-10 Advanced Landing Ground in Normandy, watching a P-47 Thunderbolt limp toward him trailing black smoke. The smell hit first. Burning rubber mixed with high-octane aviation fuel. Sharp, chemical, wrong. Then the sound. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine laboring, cylinders misfiring, exhaust popping. Heat shimmer distorted the air around Lieutenant Robert Marsh's aircraft as it descended. Radio chatter crackled across the tower frequency. Emergency vehicles to runway 27. Wounded bird inbound. Other pilots keyed in, asking Marsh's status, asking if he could make it. Marsh didn't respond. He was fighting to keep the aircraft level. The P-47 hit hard. Main gear touched 50 feet past the threshold, bounced, settled. Marsh stood on the brakes. The tires screamed. The aircraft rolled 200 feet past the normal stop point before shuddering to a halt. Ground crew sprinted from the operations tent carrying fire extinguishers. The fire truck roared across grass, bell clanging. Calabrese reached the aircraft first. He wasn't Marsh's assigned crew chief, but he'd been studying these fires for 2 weeks. He climbed the wing, looked into the cockpit. Scorch marks streaked the interior panels. The floor showed heat discoloration. Marsh's flight suit was burned at the shoulders and neck, the leather scorched brown. Marsh pulled off his oxygen mask with shaking hands. His face was pale, lips pressed tight. He climbed out slowly, legs unsteady, stood on the wing, breathing hard, looked at Calabrese and said 5 words. "I should be dead right now." Calabrese helped him down. What happened? Flak hit over quarantine. Felt the impacts. Then fuel smell. Strong. I waited for fire. Marsh's voice cracked. Kept waiting. Never came. Calabrese dropped to his knees beneath the belly. 6 20mm holes punched through the aluminum skin. One shell had passed 3 inches from the main fuel line. The line fitting was partially separated, fuel residue coating the exhaust manifold. But no ignition, no fire. Marsh should have burned to death. 23 pilots hadn't been as lucky, 23 funerals in 14 days, and Calabrese knew exactly why. The statistics told a brutal story. June 1944. The 8th Air Force was losing 3.2 P-47 Thunderbolts per day to post-hit fires. Not to the initial damage, to fires that started after damage. The P-47 was the most survivable fighter in the European theatre. Pilots brought them home with 20mm cannon holes, through wings, tails, fuselages. Engines shot out, controls damaged, hydraulics failed. The aircraft could absorb punishment that destroyed other fighters. But belly hits near the fuel system were a death sentence. The timeline was precise. 11 seconds from fuel ignition to cockpit engulfment. Pilots noticed fire at the 8 to 9 second mark. That left 2 to 3 seconds to react. In those seconds, a pilot had to release the canopy, unbuckle a 4-point harness, disconnect oxygen, disconnect radio, and clear the cockpit. Physically impossible. Most pilots died trying. Flight surgeons documented what they found in crashed aircraft. Pilots with hands fused to canopy release mechanisms. They'd grabbed the handle, tried to slide the canopy back, but fire had already taken them. Lungs seared from inhaling superheated air at over 400 degrees. Bodies still strapped in seats, never having reached the harness buckle. Medical Officer Captain James Warren's report was clinical and devastating. Cause of death: thermal injury and smoke inhalation. Time to incapacitation: 8 to 12 seconds. Survival after fire ignition: statistically impossible. Other combat deaths were different. Flak could kill instantly. A direct hit to the cockpit, the pilot gone before he knew what happened. Pilots accepted that risk. It was clean, if not quick. But fire deaths were worse. Pilots survived the initial hit, felt the aircraft shudder from flak impact, smelled fuel leaking, knew fire was coming, died waiting for it, or died trying to escape it. The psychological impact rippled through squadrons. Every pilot knew someone who'd burned. Lieutenant Eddie Kowalski over St. Lo, Captain Mike Sullivan over Cherbourg, Lieutenant Thomas Chen, who'd made it back to Allied territory but crashed in flames on the runway. Crews watched ground teams pull bodies from wreckage, watched coffins loaded onto transport aircraft. Morale dropped. Pilots began requesting transfers. Some quietly told squadron commanders they were considering refusing ground attack missions, not cowardice, mathematics. The numbers were unacceptable. 14% chance of fatal fire per 100 combat missions. The average pilot tour was 50 missions. That meant a 7% chance of burning to death before completing your tour. 7%, 1 in 14 pilots would die screaming in a cockpit they couldn't escape, and nobody in command knew how to fix it. Republic Aviation said the fuel system met specifications. Tactical officers said pilots needed better evasion techniques. Intelligence officers said German flak concentrations should be avoided. Everyone had answers that didn't solve the problem, except Vincent Calabrese. He'd been documenting every fire incident for 2 weeks, writing down names, dates, damage locations, fire progression patterns. He'd examined wreckage, measured fuel line positions, traced failure sequences. He'd found the problem. It wasn't the pilots. It wasn't German accuracy. It was a 14-inch section of rubber fuel line that whipped loose when the aircraft took damage, tearing fittings apart and spraying 100-octane fuel at 45 pounds per square inches onto an exhaust manifold, running at 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. Ignition was instantaneous. Death took 11 seconds. But Calabrese thought he could fix it. With a bent piece of steel and 90 seconds of work, the fix would violate regulations, would risk court-martial if discovered, would require finding a pilot willing to fly with an unauthorized modification, but it might stop pilots from burning alive, and that was enough. The P-47 Thunderbolts fuel system was designed for efficiency, not survival. Republic Aviation's engineers in Farmingdale, New York, had routed the main fuel line through the aircraft's belly for one reason. Shortest distance between tank and engine. Minimal weight. Optimal fuel pressure. Clean engineering on paper. The main fuel line was a 14-inch section of reinforced rubber hose. It connected the 305-gallon fuselage tank to the engine through a structural bulkhead. The routing placed it directly beneath the pilot's seat, 7 inches from the exhaust manifold. During combat operations, that manifold ran at 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. The fuel line carried 100-octane gasoline at 45 pounds per square inches. Republic's engineers had included slack in the line. 6 inches of play between anchor points. The slack served a purpose, allowed thermal expansion, prevented stress cracks during temperature changes, accommodated normal aircraft flex. Within engineering tolerances, the slack was acceptable, safe, even. But engineers in New York weren't watching pilots burn over France. When German 20mm flak shells hit the belly area, the shockwave caused violent movement throughout the structure. The fuel line, with its 6 inches of slack, whipped like a rope. Empty, the line weighed 3.4 pounds. Filled with fuel, it weighed 14.7 pounds. Under combat stress, loads hard maneuvers, flak impacts, high G pullouts, that line could move up to 9 inches in any direction. Physics took over. Movement, plus weight, plus momentum, equaled torn fittings. Even a quarter-inch separation at the fitting connection was catastrophic. Fuel sprayed at 45 pounds per square inches. The atomized mist hit the 1,400-degree exhaust manifold. Ignition was instantaneous. The fire spread through the enclosed cockpit at a measured rate, 11 seconds to complete engulfment. Pilots had no chance. Republic Aviation received field reports about fuel fires in May 1944. The engineering department reviewed combat damage assessments. Their initial conclusion: fires resulted from direct hits to the fuel system. Unavoidable combat damage. Their recommendation: pilots should avoid low-level flight over concentrated flak positions. A tactical solution: not an engineering solution. Captain Harold Morrison, maintenance officer for the 56th Fighter Group, disagreed. On June 5, Morrison sent a detailed report to Republic Aviation. 23 fatal fires in 31 days. 18 of those fires occurred after flak hits that did not directly strike the fuel line. The pattern suggested fitting failure, not line penetration. Morrison requested an engineering evaluation of the fuel line mounting system. Republic Aviation's response arrived June 8. One paragraph. Fuel system design meets all Army Air Forces specifications. Recommend continued adherence to operational procedures to minimize exposure to ground fire. Translation: not our problem. Pilots need better tactics. Morrison's frustration showed in a letter to his wife, later archived. Engineers in New York don't watch pilots burn. We do. They see specifications. We see coffins. The official channels closed. Any design change required engineering approval, testing, analysis, documentation, chain of command review. The process took 6 to 8 weeks minimum. At current casualty rates, that meant 28 more dead pilots during the approval process. Meanwhile, Vincent Calabrese worked nights in the maintenance area. June 13, 1,944, 2,230 hours. The maintenance hangar was nearly empty. Most crews had gone to sleep. Calabrese sat at a workbench under a single bare bulb, examining the fuel line removed from Lieutenant Marsh's aircraft. Calabrese wasn't like other mechanics. Most had been trained in Army Air Force's technical schools. They learned to maintain aircraft to specification, follow technical orders, replace parts according to the manual. Good mechanics, competent. But they saw their job as maintaining what existed, not improving it. Calabrese was different. He'd worked at Jones and Laughlin Steel Mill in Pittsburgh from age 16 to 29. 13 years forming structural steel components. His specialty was precision bending, I-beams, support columns, reinforcement brackets. He understood stress points, material fatigue, how forces moved through structures, how metal behaved under load. When he looked at a damaged aircraft, he didn't see a maintenance problem. He saw a structural failure that could be traced backward to its source. He'd been keeping a notebook since late May. Every fire incident documented. Date, pilot name, damage location, fire progression timeline, outcome. By June 13th, the notebook contained 23 fatal fires and 31 total fire incidents. He'd examined wreckage when possible, interviewed surviving pilots, measured fuel line positions in undamaged aircraft. A pattern emerged that others had missed. Fires occurred even when fuel lines weren't directly hit. The line itself remained intact, but fittings separated. The separation happened during the impact event, not from the shell strike itself. Calabrese measured the fuel line from Marsh's aircraft, laid it on the workbench, pulled it taut between his hands. Then relaxed tension. The line sagged. He measured the sag, 6.2 inches of slack. He thought about steel mills, about I-beams vibrating under load, about the brackets they installed to prevent destructive oscillation, about constraining movement to acceptable ranges. The fuel line didn't need to move 6 inches. It needed to stay still. He tested the line's movement by hand, pulled it side to side, up and down. The fittings showed stress marks where metal had scraped metal. The marks told a story. Repeated impacts, fitting working loose gradually, then separating catastrophically under one final shock. The solution was obvious. The line needed a rigid anchor point. Something to prevent the whipping motion. Allow enough flex to prevent stress cracks, but constrain destructive movement. Calabrese walked to the scrap pile behind the maintenance hangar. Found a damaged P-47 wing spar, salvaged from an aircraft that ground-looped on June 8. The aircraft was destroyed, but parts were useful. He cut an 8-inch section of aluminum spar using a hacksaw. The material was 7075 T6 aluminum alloy, the same used throughout the aircraft structure. He carried the section back to his workbench, fired up a propane torch from the welding station, heated the aluminum until it glowed dull red, then bent it in a bench vise using a 3-pound hammer. The bend had to be precise. Too much angle and the aluminum would crack, too little and the bracket wouldn't constrain the fuel line properly. Calabrese bent it in 4 stages, checking the angle after each heating cycle. His hands knew the work. 13 years of steel mill experience guided each hammer blow. 23 minutes later, he had a U-shaped bracket, 8 inches long, 2.5 inches wide. It would fit around the fuel line with 1/8 inch clearance. Enough room to avoid crushing the line, tight enough to prevent movement. He drilled 2 mounting holes for bolts. Found 2 hose clamps in a parts bin salvaged from a damaged C-47 transport. The clamps would secure the fuel line inside the bracket without deforming it. Total material cost, $1.47. Installation time, 90 seconds. And 23 dead pilots who might still be alive if someone had thought of this sooner. June 14th, 1944. 0340 hours. Calabrese worked alone in the maintenance area. The night was humid, insects buzzing against overhead lights. Most personnel were asleep in tents scattered across the airfield perimeter. A single guard walked patrol near the operations building, his silhouette passing under dim blackout lights. Calabrese had the prototype bracket in his hand. 8 inches of bent aluminum, shaped like a U. 2 bolt holes drilled precisely. 2 stainless steel hose clamps ready. Everything he needed to test whether 23 pilots had died because of 6 inches of slack nobody thought to eliminate. But testing meant installation. Installation meant modifying an aircraft. And modifying an aircraft without authorization meant court-martial. The maintenance test aircraft sat in the hangar, P-47 D-25, tail number 42 to 26891, not assigned to combat operations. Used for systems checks, engine run-ups, maintenance procedure verification. If the bracket failed, at least it wouldn't kill a combat pilot. Calabrese rolled a work stand to the aircraft's belly, removed the access panel. 4 screws, 90 seconds of work. The panel came away, revealing the fuel system routing. The rubber fuel line ran from the fuselage tank forward through the structural bulkhead toward the engine. The line sagged between anchor points, exactly as he'd measured before. He positioned the bracket around the fuel line where it passed through the bulkhead. The U-shape fit perfectly, surrounding the line without touching it. He marked bolt hole positions on the bulkhead with a pencil, removed the bracket, drilled 2 holes through the aluminum structure using a hand drill. The bit squealed against metal. Calabrese stopped every 30 seconds, listening for anyone approaching. The guard's footsteps stayed distant. He bolted the bracket to the bulkhead, used AN-312, a bolt salvaged from damaged aircraft. Standard hardware, nothing unusual. Torqued them to 40 inch-pounds using a calibrated wrench. The bracket held firm against the structure. Now the critical part. He positioned the fuel line inside the bracket's U-channel, installed the first hose clamp around the line and bracket, tightened it carefully. Too loose and the line would still move. Too tight and the clamp would crush the rubber, creating a leak point. He tightened until the line was snug but not deformed. Installed the second clamp 6 inches forward. Same careful tensioning. Total installation time, 10 minutes, 15 seconds. Much longer than he'd hoped, but this was the first attempt. With practice, he could cut that time significantly. Calabrese tested the installation by hand, grabbed the fuel line and tried to move it. It shifted only a 1/4 inch in any direction. The bracket constrained lateral movement. The hose clamps prevented the line from sliding forward or backward. The fittings stayed perfectly aligned, no stress angles. He replaced the access panel, cleaned his tools. No visible evidence of modification from outside the aircraft. At 0420 hours, he started the engine. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 coughed, cylinders firing in sequence, then settled into a rough idle. Calabrese let it warm up for 3 minutes, checked fuel pressure, 45 pounds per square inches, normal. Checked for leaks around fittings, none visible. Advanced throttle to 1,500 revolutions per minute. The engine smoothed out, exhaust note deepening. He ran the engine at full power for 10 minutes. The exhaust manifold heated to operational temperature, 1,400 degrees. Fuel pressure remained steady. He shut down, let the engine cool for 5 minutes, then inspected the installation. The bracket showed no deformation. Bolts remained torqued to specification. Fuel line showed no stress marks. Fittings were tight, no movement, no leaks. The modification worked perfectly in a controlled test. But controlled testing wasn't combat. Combat involved sudden impacts, multiple G loads, sustained vibration, thermal stress cycles. The only way to know if the bracket worked under combat conditions was to test it under combat conditions, which meant finding a pilot willing to fly with an unauthorized modification. A pilot who understood that if the bracket failed and caused a mechanical problem, Calabrese faced court-martial. A pilot who understood that if the bracket failed and the aircraft crashed, both of them could face manslaughter charges. A pilot who understood the fan, the risk, and accepted it anyway. Calabrese walked to the pilot-ready room at 0700 hours. Morning briefing was scheduled for 0730. Pilots gathered in small groups, drinking coffee from tin cups, smoking cigarettes, talking quietly. Some studied mission maps. Others wrote letters they hoped wouldn't be their last. Calabrese scanned the room. 16 pilots present. He needed someone specific, experienced enough to handle an emergency if the bracket failed, aggressive enough to fly the kind of low-level missions that caused fuel fires, and trustworthy enough to keep quiet about an unauthorized modification. He saw Lieutenant James Hendricks near the coffee urn, 24 years old. Omaha, Nebraska. 47 combat missions completed. 2 confirmed aerial kills, 8 ground kills. Known for pressing attacks, staying low, hitting hard. Exactly the profile most likely to take belly damage. Hendricks was also known for mechanical curiosity. He often watched maintenance crews work, asked questions about aircraft systems, understood how things functioned. Some pilots treated their aircraft like cars, just drive them, don't worry about how they work. Hendricks treated his aircraft like a tool he needed to understand completely. Calabrese approached. Lieutenant Hendricks, need a word outside. Hendricks set down his coffee, followed Calabrese into the morning light. The sun was rising over the Normandy hedgerows, casting long shadows across the airfield. Distant artillery rumbled from the front lines, a constant background noise everyone had learned to ignore. "What's on your mind, Sergeant?" Calabrese pulled out his notebook, opened it to the first page. 23 names, 23 dates, 23 fuel fires. "I've been documenting every fire incident since late May. 23 pilots burned to death, all from the same problem, fuel line fittings tearing loose after flak hits." Hendricks scanned the list. His jaw tightened. 3 names he recognized. Ray, Parker, Mike Sullivan, Thomas Chen, squadron mates, friends. "I know. I watched Parker burn, heard him on the radio. I found the problem," Calabrese said. "Fuel line has too much slack. When the aircraft takes damage, the line whips around, tears the fittings loose. Fuel sprays onto the exhaust manifold at 1,400 degrees. Instant fire." Republic Aviation knows about this? "They know. They said the design meets specifications. Told us pilots should use better tactics." Hendricks's expression hardened. "Better tactics." Parker used perfect tactics. Still burned. "I made something." Calabrese showed him the bracket. Explained the engineering. The constraint system. The movement limitation. "It should prevent the fittings from tearing loose." "Should?" "I tested it on a maintenance aircraft. Worked perfectly. But I haven't tested it in combat." "Because it's not authorized." "No, it's not." Hendricks studied the bracket, turned it in his hands. "What happens if it fails?" Same thing that's already happening. Fuel fire if you take belly damage. What happens to you if command finds out? Court-martial. Maybe prison. And you're willing to risk that? Calabrese looked at the notebook in Hendrix's hand. 23 names? Yes. Hendrix handed back the notebook, looked at the bracket one more time, then looked at Calabrese. Install it on my aircraft. June 14th, 1944. 1,420 hours. Calabrese stood beneath Lieutenant Hendrix's P-47D-25, tail number 42-26877. The aircraft's nickname, Lucky Strike, was painted on the nose in yellow letters beneath the cockpit. A cartoon cigarette package grinned next to the name. 17 mission marks lined the fuselage below the canopy rail. 17 times Hendrix had flown into German flak and come home. Hendrix climbed onto the wing, watching Calabrese work. He'd told his crew chief he wanted to observe some maintenance procedures. Not unusual. Hendrix often watched mechanics work, asked questions, learned how systems functioned. His crew chief had shrugged and moved to another aircraft. Calabrese removed the belly access panel. 4 screws, practiced movements, 45 seconds. The fuel line was visible inside, rubber hose running from tank to engine, sagging between mounting points. 6 inches of slack that could kill a man in 11 seconds. He positioned the bracket around the fuel line at the bulkhead passage point. The aluminum U-channel fit perfectly, surrounding the line with 1/8 inch clearance. He marked bolt holes with a pencil, removed the bracket, drilled through the bulkhead structure. Hendrix leaned over the wing edge. How long will this take? About 90 seconds once the holes are drilled. I'm getting faster. And if it fails? You'll know immediately. Either the bracket stays intact or it breaks. If it breaks, you're back to standard fuel line configuration. Same risk as every other P-47 inches the theatre. Except I'll be flying with broken metal inside my fuel system. The bracket's external to the line. If it fails, pieces fall away from the line, not into it. Hendrix nodded. Watched Calabrese bolt the bracket to the bulkhead, torque the bolts to specification, install the hose clamps around the fuel line. The work was precise, methodical. Calabrese's hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd bent steel for 13 years before bending aluminum. Installation complete. Calabrese tugged the fuel line, testing constraint. 1/4 inch movement maximum. Perfect. He replaced the access panel, collected his tools, stepped back. Done. Fuel system is now constrained. Fittings should stay intact even under heavy shock loads. Should. Calabrese confirmed. I can't promise what happens in combat. Nobody can. Hendrix climbed down from the wing, walked around the aircraft, ran his hand along the belly. No external indication of modification. Just another P-47 waiting for another mission. When's my next flight? Schedule shows June 18th. Ground attack mission. Target? Briefing's not until the 17th, but scuttlebutt says armor concentration near Cayenne. Panzer divisions moving to reinforce the beachhead. Hendrix's expression didn't change. Heavy flak. Probably. Low-level attack profile. Most likely. Perfect test case, then. Hendrix looked at Calabrese. If I don't come back, you'll come back. If I don't, this wasn't your fault. I volunteered. My decision. You were trying to save lives. Calabrese said nothing, picked up his toolbox, walked toward the maintenance tent without looking back. Hendrix stood beside his aircraft for another 5 minutes, hand resting on the wing, thinking about fuel lines and fittings and 11 seconds of fire, thinking about Ray Parker screaming on the radio, thinking about the fact that he had 53 missions left to complete his tour and a 7% statistical chance of burning to death before he finished. Thinking about whether a bent piece of aluminum and 2 hose clamps were worth betting his life on. Then he walked to the operations building and signed his aircraft back into service. June 18th, 1944, 0545 hours. Operations briefing room. 16 pilots sat on folding chairs facing a wall map of Normandy. Red pins marked German positions. Blue pins marked Allied lines. The front had moved 5 miles inland since D-Day, but progress was slow. Hedgerows, machine gun nests, and armor. Major Thomas Crane, squadron commander, stood beside the map holding a wooden pointer. "Gentlemen, today's target is a German armor column 4 miles south of Caen. Intelligence reports 20-plus tanks, mostly Panzer IVs and Panthers, with supporting vehicles. They're moving north to reinforce 2nd Panzer Division." He tapped the map with the pointer. "Flak concentration is heavy. We count at least 12 88mm positions and estimate 30-plus 20mm guns with the column. This is not a milk run." Pilots shifted in chairs, faces tight. 12 aircraft, assigned. 4 flights of 3. Armament is 8. 50 caliber, with standard load, plus 2 500-pound bombs per aircraft. Mission profile. Climb to 12,000 feet over the channel, cross the coast at Ouistreham, approach target from northeast with sun behind us. Dive bomb the armor. Primary targets are the Panthers. Secondary targets are trucks and half-tracks. If you have ammunition remaining after your bomb run, strafe the vehicle column on egress. Crane paused. Expected casualties. 2 to 3 aircraft damaged. Possible loss of 1 aircraft. Flak will be continuous from initial dive through egress. Keep your speed up. Don't linger in the target area. He set down the pointer. Questions? Lieutenant Robert Williams raised his hand. What's our fighter cover? None. P-51 seconds are committed to bomber escort over Germany. We're on our own. What about rescue if someone goes down? Allied territory is 5 miles north of target. If you take damage, try to make it back to our lines before bailing out. If you go down in enemy territory, evade east toward the beachhead. Resistance fighters are active in this area. Hendricks raised his hand. What if we take damage but can still fly? Assess your aircraft condition. If you can make it home, try. If you're on fire or have control failure, bail out over friendly territory if possible. On fire. The words hung in the briefing room. Every pilot knew what that meant. 11 seconds. Canopy release. Harness buckles. No time. Hendricks felt the weight of the bracket installation beneath his aircraft. 57 seconds of work. Quarter inch of constrained movement. A mechanic's theory about fuel line whipping motion. His life might depend on whether that theory was correct. Briefing concluded at 0615 hours. Pilots filed out into morning sunlight. Some walked to their aircraft immediately, conducting pre-flight inspections. Others stood in small groups, smoking, not talking much. Calabrese was waiting near the hardstand, where Lucky Strike was parked. He didn't approach Hendricks directly, just made eye contact across 50 feet of tarmac. Hendricks nodded once. Calabrese nodded back. Then Hendricks walked to his aircraft, climbed onto the wing, and began his pre-flight inspection. His crew chief, Sergeant Danny Morrison, was already there, checking tire pressure. "She's ready, Lieutenant." Fuels topped off, ammunition loaded, bombs armed. "Engine run up this morning?" 0500 hours. Smooth as glass. Oil pressure steady. All systems green. Hendricks completed his walk-around, checked control surfaces, verified armament, inspected the belly, where 6 inches of slack used to kill pilots. No visible indication of Calabrese's modification. Just aluminum skin and rivets. 0715 hours. Hendricks climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, 4-point harness, oxygen connection, radio lead. He tested the canopy mechanism, slid it back, slid it forward, locked it, tested it again. 11 seconds. Had to know that. Canopy would move when needed. 0723 hours. 12 P-47 seconds, engines fired in sequence, propellers turning, exhausts belching blue smoke. Hendricks released brakes, taxied to runway position 4, waited for Major Crane's takeoff roll, then followed. The P-47 accelerated down the dirt strip, tail coming up, airspeed building. 80 knots, 100, 120. Hendricks pulled back. The aircraft lifted, gear retracting, Normandy falling away beneath him. Somewhere under his seat, a bent piece of aluminum held a fuel line in place. In 3 hours, he'd find out if it worked. 0847 hours. 12 P-47 seconds crossed the Orne River at 12,000 feet. Below, Normandy spread out in a patchwork of hedgerows and farm fields. Smoke rose from burning villages. Artillery flashes marked the front lines. Hendricks could see the target area 4 miles ahead. Dark shapes moving through fields, tanks, 30 or more vehicles in column formation. Then the flak started. Black bursts appeared at 11,000 feet. German 88mm guns firing from positions around the armor column. The shells exploded in clusters, shrapnel spreading outward in lethal spheres. Hendricks felt the aircraft buck as a shell burst 200 feet to his right. The concussion wave hit like a physical blow. Major Crane's voice crackled over the radio. Echelon right. Prepare to roll in on my mark. The formation shifted. 12 aircraft in stepped positions, each pilot selecting a target. Hendricks picked a Panther tank near the column center. The distinctive long gun barrel made it easy to identify. High-value target. Rolling in. Now. Hendricks counted 3 seconds for his position in the formation. 1, 1,000. 2, 1,000. 3, 1,000. Then rolled inverted at 11,500 feet. Pulled through to a 60-degree dive. The world rotated. Sky became ground. Ground became target. The Panther tank centered in his gun sight. Airspeed built rapidly. 320, 380, 420, 460. Wind screamed past the canopy. The control stick stiffened as airspeed increased. Flak intensified. Orange tracers from 20mm guns curved up toward him. They looked slow from altitude, almost lazy arcs. But they were traveling 2,000 feet per second. Hendricks saw one tracer pass 10 feet from his left wing, then felt impacts. Metallic thuds, 3 distinct hits. The aircraft shuddered. Warning lights flickered on the instrument panel. He released both 500-pound bombs at 2,200 feet. Watched them fall away, tumbling toward the Panther. Pulled back hard on the stick. 6.5 Gs crushed him into the seat. His vision narrowed, pressure suit inflating around his legs and abdomen. The P-47 pulled out of the dive at 1,400 feet, wings straining, engine roaring, level flight at 800 feet. Hendricks checked instruments, oil pressure dropping. Red light. 65 psi down to 35 and falling, hydraulic pressure fluctuating. Amber light. Cycling between 800 and 1,200 pounds per square inches. No fire warning light. Yet. He keyed radio. Lucky Strike took hits, checking damage. Visually scanned the wings. No visible holes. Looked at the engine cowling. Smoke trailing from somewhere underneath. Oil smoke, not fuel. Different smell. Then the fuel smell hit, sharp, overwhelming. High-octane gasoline vapor filling the cockpit. Hendricks's hand moved to the canopy release. Pure instinct. Training. When you smell fuel, prepare to bail out. Fire comes next. 11 seconds until you're dead. He waited. 5 seconds. No fire. 10 seconds. No flames visible, no heat, just the smell. 15 seconds. Still no ignition. His heart hammered, every nerve screaming at him to bail out now before fire started. But no fire came. 20 seconds. 30. 45. Fuel pressure gauge showed 28 pounds per square inches and dropping. Normal was 45. Definite leak somewhere in the system. Fuel was escaping. He could smell it saturating the cockpit air. But it wasn't spraying onto the exhaust manifold. The bracket was holding the line in place. Hendricks keyed the radio, voice steady despite adrenaline flooding his system. Lucky Strike. Fuel leak confirmed but no fire. Aircraft controllable. Returning to base. 3 seconds of radio silence. Then Major Crane's voice. carefully controlled. Say again? Lucky strike? Fuel leak, no fire. Continuing to base. Major Crane had listened to pilots burn on the radio, had heard them scream as cockpits engulfed. Now Hendricks was reporting a fuel leak without fire. Something impossible. Roger, emergency equipment standing by. Hendricks turned northwest, climbed slowly to 4,000 feet for glide range if the engine quit. Oil pressure dropped to 20 pounds per square inches. Then, 15. Hydraulic system failed completely 2 miles from base. Manual gear extension. No flaps. Limited braking. He lined up on final approach. The P-47 felt heavy, sluggish without hydraulic assist. Touched down hard. Right main gear first, then left. The right tire blew immediately. The aircraft pulled hard. Right. Hendricks stood on left brake, fought the pull, kept it on the runway. Skidded 400 feet before stopping. He shut down the engine, sat in silence, hands shaking now that adrenaline was fading. He'd smelled fuel for 12 minutes. Waited for fire that never came. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. Ground crew arrived running. "Lieutenant, you injured?" "No." His voice cracked. "Find Sergeant Calabrese, now. I'll create Part 6, focusing on the damage assessment and the beginning of the modifications spread through the squadron. Text, markdown June 18th, 1000. 944, 1030 hours. Calabrese stood beneath Lucky Strike with Lieutenant Hendricks beside him. 5 other pilots had gathered around the damaged aircraft. Word spread fast when someone survived what should have killed them. Calabrese documented the damage in his notebook. 6 20mm shell impacts to the belly area. 1 crater 3 inches from the main fuel line. If that shell had hit 6 inches left, direct strike to the line. Certain fire. The oil cooler housing showed 2 impact points. That explained the oil pressure loss. 3 hydraulic lines were severed. That explained the hydraulic failure. Multiple fragment impacts peppered the belly skin. But the fuel system told the critical story. Calabrese removed the belly access panel. The other pilots leaned in, watching. The fuel line was still secured in the bracket. 0 movement from the original installation position. The aluminum U-channel showed no deformation. Bolts were still torqued to specification. Hose clamps held the line firmly. The line itself had a crack. 8 inches forward of the bracket. The crack measured 0.4 inches long, probably from fragment impact or shockwave stress. Fuel had seeped from that crack at approximately 2 gallons per minute. Slow leak. Not the catastrophic spray that caused fires. Most important, the crack was in the wrong location to cause ignition. Away from the bracket, away from the fittings, away from the exhaust, manifold. The leak couldn't reach the 1,400-degree surface. Hendricks pointed at the shell crater 3 inches from the fuel line. That impact should have killed me. Yes, Calabrese said. Shockwave from that hit would have whipped an unbracketed line 6 to 9 inches. Fittings would have torn loose at both ends. Fuel spray at 45 pounds per square inches directly onto exhaust manifold. Instant ignition. But the bracket held the line in place. 1/4 inch movement maximum. Fittings stayed intact. No separation, no spray. No fire. Lieutenant Robert Williams stepped closer. How long to install one of these on my aircraft? 90 seconds once the brackets fabricated. Captain David Morrison pushed through the group. I want one. Lieutenant Thomas Kowalski. Me too. Lieutenant Daniel Chen. My aircraft, today. Hendricks looked at the 5 pilots. You understand this isn't authorized. If command finds out, Sergeant Calabrese faces court-martial. Williams nodded. I understand. I also understand 23 pilots burned to death last month. I'd rather risk court-martial than burn alive. The others agreed. Calabrese closed his notebook. I'll need help. Can't fabricate brackets fast enough alone. What do you need? Williams asked. Someone who can bend aluminum precisely. Someone who can drill mounting holes. Someone who can assist with installations. Staff Sergeant Frank Murphy stepped forward. I can bend metal. Worked sheet metal fabrication before the war. Sergeant Bill Crawford. I can drill. Machinist training. Tonight, Calabrese said. 2,100 hours. Maintenance hangar. We'll set up a production line. June 18th, 1,944. 2,100 hours. 3 men worked under dim lights in the maintenance hangar. Calabrese taught Murphy the bracket bending technique, heating the aluminum to precise temperature, bending in stages to prevent stress cracks, achieving the correct U-channel dimensions. Murphy produced his first bracket in 11 minutes. Calabrese inspected it. Perfect dimensions. No cracks. Good. Keep that pace. Crawford prepared hardware. Bolts, hose clamps, drilling templates, everything staged for rapid installation. They developed an assembly line system. Murphy fabricated brackets. Crawford prepared hardware and drilled mounting holes. Calabrese installed and quality checked. 1 complete installation every 12 minutes. By 0400 hours June 19th, they'd modified 8 aircraft. Calabrese recorded tail numbers in his notebook: 42-26891, 42-26903, 42-26915, 42-26922, 42-26934, 42-26947, 42-26951, 42-26968. The pilots found brackets during morning pre-flights. Word spread through the squadron before breakfast. Calabrese fixed the fire problem. By 0800 hours, 12 more pilots requested modifications. The revolution had started with 1 mechanic, 1 bent piece of aluminum, and 1 pilot willing to test it. Now it was spreading through the squadron like fuel vapor looking for ignition. Except this time, the spark would save lives, instead of taking them. Text, Markdown. June 20th through June 25th, 1,944. The modified aircraft flew combat missions. The bracket's effectiveness showed immediately in 5 separate incidents. Lieutenant Robert Parker, June 21st, ground attack mission near Bayeux. His P-47 took 4 20mm hits to the belly during a strafing run on German transport trucks. Hydraulic system damaged, oil cooler punctured, but fuel system intact, no fire. Parker limped home on partial hydraulics, landed safely. Aircraft repaired and returned to service June 23rd. Captain David Williams, June 22nd, fighter sweep over Carentan. An 88mm flak fragment penetrated his belly skin near the fuel line. The fragment was the size of a fist, traveling at 3,000 feet per second. It punched through aluminum like paper, missed the fuel line by 2 inches. Shockwave rattled everything in the fuselage. Oil cooler destroyed. But the fuel line stayed secured in its bracket. 0 fitting separation. No fire. Williams made emergency landing at a forward airfield. Walked away. Lieutenant Thomas Kowalski, June 23rd, ground attack near Saint-Lô. Direct 20mm hit to belly area. Massive damage. The shell detonated on impact, blasting a hole 8 inches across. Fuel line bracket held, but the line itself was punctured not at a fitting, but in the line wall 6 inches behind the bracket. Fuel leaked at approximately 3 gallons per minute. Kowalski smelled it immediately. Waited for fire. No ignition. The leak couldn't reach the exhaust manifold. Wrong location. He flew 12 minutes back to base with fuel streaming from his belly, landed with 10 gallons remaining in the tank. The pattern was clear. Pilots with brackets survived belly damage. Fuel leaks occurred, but leaks didn't cause fires. The bracket kept fittings intact, kept fuel spray away from ignition sources. But 2 pilots died during this same period. Lieutenant James Peterson, June 21st. No bracket installed. His aircraft took flak over Argentan. Fuel fire started 8 seconds after impact. Peterson tried to bail out but couldn't release the canopy fast enough. Crashed in Allied territory. Ground forces reached the wreckage within minutes. Too late. Lieutenant Robert Sanchez, June 24th. No bracket installed. Fire started over the target area after belly damage. Sanchez transmitted, "I'm burning," on the radio. 7 seconds later, his transmission cut off. Aircraft crashed in enemy territory. Body never recovered. After Peterson's death, 4 pilots who'd been waiting to see results requested brackets immediately. After Sanchez's death, every remaining pilot in the 61st Fighter Squadron without a bracket requested installation. No one wanted to be next. By June 25, 40 aircraft in the squadron were equipped with Calabrese's modification. Maintenance crews worked double shifts to keep pace with demand. Murphy and Crawford trained 2 more mechanics in bracket fabrication. The installation time dropped to 75 seconds per aircraft. Other squadrons noticed. The 62nd and 63rd Fighter Squadrons shared the same airfield. Their pilots saw 61st Squadron aircraft taking belly damage without catching fire, saw pilots coming home who should have died, started asking questions. The statistics told an undeniable story. June 1st through June 17th, 1,944. Pre-bracket period. The 56th Fighter Group flew 441 combat sorties. 38 aircraft took belly damage from flak. 17 fuel system fires resulted. 12 pilots died. Fire rate, 44.7% of belly damage resulted in fire. Fatality rate from fires, 70%. June 18th through July 31st, 1,944. Bracket adoption period across all squadrons. The 56th Fighter Group flew 1,847 combat sorties. 89 aircraft took belly damage from flak. 11 fuel system fires resulted. 3 pilots died. Fire rate, 12.4% of belly damage resulted in fire. Fatality rate from fires, 27%. The reduction was 73%. Other fighter groups showed similar patterns where brackets weren't adopted. The 78th Fighter Group, operating without brackets through July 19th, maintained a 47% fire rate from belly damage. After adopting the modification on July 20th, their rate dropped to 15% within 2 weeks. The 353rd Fighter Group adopted brackets on July 8th. Before adoption, 41% fire rate. After adoption, 14%. The data was irrefutable. The bracket worked. In early July, Republic Aviation received field reports about the dramatic fire rate reduction in European theatre units. Their engineering department noticed an anomaly. The 56th Fighter Group's statistics had changed drastically in mid-June. Fire casualties had dropped by 70%. Aircraft recovery rates had improved. Something had changed. They sent an investigation team. Donald Hammond, senior engineer, arrived at the 56th Fighter Group base on July 18th with 2 assistants. Hammond interviewed pilots, inspected modified aircraft, reviewed maintenance logs. He found Calabrese's brackets on 73 aircraft across 3 squadrons. Hammond examined one bracket for 15 minutes, measured dimensions, checked bolt torque, tested fuel line constraint. Then he pulled out a notepad and calculated stress loads. His conclusion, documented in a letter to Republic Aviation's chief engineer dated July 20th. Field mechanics have independently developed and implemented a fuel line support modification that reduces fire casualties by approximately 70%. The modification is simple, effective, and should have been part of the original design. Hammond conducted formal engineering analysis over 3 days. Stress testing, vibration testing, thermal cycling, safety assessment. Every test confirmed the bracket improved safety without creating new failure modes. Hammond recommended immediate integration into production aircraft, but his report never mentioned Calabrese by name. It credited field maintenance personnel, generically, corporate policy. Republic Aviation couldn't officially acknowledge that mechanics in a combat zone had outperformed their engineering department. Couldn't admit the original design had a fatal flaw that killed dozens of pilots. September 1944. Republic Aviation introduced Engineering Improvement 44-38. Official description. Fuel line support bracket for improved combat durability. Integration into P-47D-30 production models started September 15. Retrofit kits manufactured for earlier variants. Official documentation stated the improvement was developed through analysis of combat damage patterns and engineering stress studies. No mention of field modifications. No mention of Vincent Calabrese. No mention of a mechanic who bent aluminum in a maintenance hangar while pilots burned overhead. Standard procedure. Protect the corporate engineering reputation. Calabrese never complained. Never requested recognition. When asked about it years later, he said, "I didn't care who got credit. I cared that pilots stopped dying." Text, Markdown post-war analysis, told the full story in numbers that nobody wanted to acknowledge. In 1947, the Army Air Force's Historical Division conducted a comprehensive study of P-47 combat losses. They tracked every belly fire incident from June 1944 through May 1945, correlated the data with bracket modification adoption dates across fighter groups, built statistical models comparing expected casualties versus actual casualties. Their finding: 314 pilots survived belly fire damage who statistically should have died. The calculation was straightforward. Pre-bracket fire survival rate, 12%. Post-bracket fire survival rate, 73%. Number of belly fire incidents in bracket-equipped aircraft, 427, between June 1944 and war's end. Expected deaths at 12% survival. 376 pilots. Actual deaths at 73% survival, 62 pilots. Difference: 314 lives saved. Those 314 men returned home. To families. To futures they wouldn't have had. To lives that extended decades beyond a cockpit fire over France. Some of their stories were documented in post-war interviews. Lieutenant James Hendricks completed 89 combat missions, survived the war. Became an airline pilot for United Airlines, flew for 32 years. Married, 3 children. Died in 1998, age 78. He'd lived 54 years past the day he should have burned to death. Captain Robert Williams took flak on July 2, 1944. Survived because of the bracket. Became a mechanical engineer after the war. Designed industrial safety equipment. He credited Calabrese's bracket with teaching him that the most important innovations are often the simplest ones. Williams died in 2003, age 84. Lieutenant Thomas Kowalski survived his August 15th fire incident, became a high school physics teacher in Chicago, taught for 40 years, used the fuel line bracket as a classroom example of practical engineering, how a bent piece of metal and an understanding of physics saved his life. Kowalski died in 2007, age 87. Most of the 314 never knew exactly why they survived. They knew their aircraft took damage, knew fuel leaked, knew fire never started. Assumed they were lucky. Few learned about the bracket modification. Fewer knew Calabrese's name. None could thank him personally because they didn't know who to thank. Vincent Calabrese returned to Pittsburgh in October 1945. Master Sergeant, honorable discharge. He went back to Jones and Laughlin Steel Mill. Same job he'd left in 1942. Precision steel forming. Same department, same shift. As if the war had been a 3-year interruption in an otherwise ordinary life. He married Anna Rossetti in June 1947, Sacred Heart Church, Pittsburgh. 3 children. Vincent Jr., born 1948. Marie, born 1950. Anthony, born 1953. He worked at the steel mill for 33 years. Retired in 1978, age 65. He never talked about the war. His family knew he'd been an aircraft mechanic, nothing more. He kept the notebook with the fire incident documentation in a drawer. Never showed anyone. Never wrote about it. Never contacted military historians or aviation writers. Occasionally, former pilots found him. Lieutenant Hendricks visited in 1976. showed up at Calabrese's house unannounced. Said, "You saved my life. I've thought about that every day for 32 years. Calabrese invited him in. They talked for 2 hours. Hendricks asked permission to tell the story publicly. Calabrese said no. It was just a bracket. Other mechanics did more important work. Asked if he could write about the modification in an engineering journal. Calabrese declined. The war's over, let it stay over. Calabrese died March 14, 1981, age 68. Heart attack at home. Funeral held March 17 at Sacred Heart Church. 47 people attended. Family? Former steel mill co-workers. 3 former pilots who'd heard about his death through veteran networks. No military honors ceremony. Calabrese had never requested veteran recognition. Never joined veteran organizations. Never attended reunions. Buried at Calvary Catholic Cemetery, Pittsburgh. Standard military gravestone. Vincent Calabrese, Master Sergeant, U.S. Army Air Forces, 1913 to 1981. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette obituary ran March 15, 1981. 4 paragraphs. Employment history. Jones and Laughlin Steel Mill, 1929 to 1978. Family. Survived by wife Anna, 3 children, 5 grandchildren. Military service. 1 sentence. He served as aircraft mechanic in Army Air Forces during World War II. Funeral arrangements. No mention of 314 pilots saved. No mention of the fuel line bracket. No mention of an innovation that changed aviation safety. History books about the P-47 Thunderbolt mention improved fuel system reliability in late 1944. Attribute the improvement to engineering refinements by Republic Aviation. Credit. Engineering improvement 44 to 38. Never mention field modifications. Never mention mechanics working night shifts in Normandy. Never mention Vincent Calabrese. His story disappeared into silence. But the numbers remain. 1 mechanic, 1 notebook documenting 23 preventable deaths, 1 bent piece of aluminum, 2 salvaged hose clamps, 90 seconds of installation time, $1.47 in materials, 314 lives saved, 0 official recognition. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through engineering committees or official programs, through people who see problems and fix them. Through mechanics who care more about results than recognition. Through men like Vincent Calabrese, who bent metal in the dark while pilots burned overhead, and never asked for anything except that the dying would stop. It did stop. Because of him. And 314 men lived full lives because a Pittsburgh steelworker refused to accept that fuel fires were inevitable. That was enough for Calabrese. It should be enough for us to remember his name.